Imagine living in the United States for decades under a program meant to be temporary. Raising families, buying homes, working jobs, and calling this nation home, only to suddenly be told it's time to leave. That's the reality facing over 500,000 migrants under Temporary Protected Status, or TPS. A system originally designed as a short-term solution but now stretched far beyond its original purpose. With legal challenges, rallies, and government crackdowns colliding, the United States is facing a massive immigration dilemma, and ICE has just exposed the loophole that allows hundreds of thousands to remain in the country despite their legal protection coming to an end. The question now is whether America will stand firm on its laws or allow emotions, politics, and activism to override its sovereignty. In San Francisco, a rally erupted outside the federal courthouse as activists gathered to defend roughly 60,000 migrants in immediate danger of losing their TPS protection. These individuals come from Honduras, Nepal, and Nicaragua, countries that were once deemed too unstable due to natural disasters or political conflict. For years, migrants from these regions have legally lived and worked in the U.S., but the Trump administration drew a line, announcing the expiration of their protections and setting firm deadlines. Suddenly, thousands who had built lives in America, some for decades, were told that time had run out. Arguments rang out in court, with lawyers challenging the administration's decision, insisting that revoking TPS violated promises made to vulnerable communities. Activists filled the streets with songs, chants, and signs, but one glaring fact stood out. The program's name is Temporary Protected Status. By design, it was never meant to be permanent. Yet after nearly 20 years, many holders insist that America is now their true home, while others argue they are simply exploiting a loophole to stay indefinitely. This controversy cuts straight to the heart of the nation's immigration debate. ICE officials have clarified repeatedly, entering the United States illegally is a federal crime. While they prioritize violent offenders, no one is exempt from deportation. That means TPS holders, though once legally shielded, can now be targeted once their protections expire. Critics accuse ICE of cruelty, but the law is explicit. TPS grants temporary relief, not a guaranteed pathway to citizenship. The emotional appeals at rallies often blur this fact. Many demonstrators argued that migrants have contributed by working jobs, paying taxes, and sending their kids to American schools. Yet to critics, this simply highlights the problem. Those jobs, homes, and opportunities came at the expense of American citizens. To them, assimilation looks absent at best, and defiance at worst. At rallies, Spanish-language music and foreign signs filled the air, raising questions about whether these groups were integrating into American culture or creating parallel communities resistant to blending. For everyday Americans who followed the rules to immigrate legally, the idea of others bypassing the system feels not only unfair but deeply insulting. The stories of TPS holders are undeniably emotional. Take the example of Cindy Alama, who fled Nepal after the devastating earthquake. She described being deeply grateful for the chance to rebuild her life in the United States without fear, using TPS to support her family and pursue her dreams. Now, after nearly 20 years, she claims America is her home. To activists, her testimony shows the humanity behind the legal fight. But opponents see a harsher truth. Temporary status was never intended to transform into permanent residency. Natural disasters happen everywhere, including the U.S. Yet Americans don't flee their homeland when wildfires ravage California or hurricanes destroy homes in Texas. Instead, they rebuild, demonstrating loyalty to their nation. Critics argue that abandoning one's country during a crisis doesn't prove resilience, but desertion, and rewarding that decision undermines the sacrifices Americans make when disaster strikes. But to many, the uncomfortable reality is that decades of residence don't erase the program's temporary nature. Her presence highlights how TPS has quietly evolved from a short-term safety net into a de facto pathway to permanent residency, something Congress never approved. TPS was originally created in 1990 during the Salvadoran Civil War, a humanitarian measure to protect refugees from chaos abroad. Over time, it expanded to cover migrants from 17 countries suffering war, political repression, or natural disasters. But what began as a narrow exception gradually ballooned into a massive population of over 500,000 people. For decades, raising children who are American citizens by birth, supporters argue this reality cannot be ignored. Uprooting entire families is cruel and destabilizing. Yet critics counter that decades of ignoring expiration dates doesn't make the program permanent. Instead, it shows how deeply broken immigration enforcement has become. Congress deliberately gave the executive branch authority to decide when protections end. Homeland Security's conclusion that conditions in countries like Honduras, Nicaragua, and Nepal have improved enough to safely send people back falls squarely within that legal authority. For years, administrations kicked the can down the road, fearful of backlash. Now, ICE is shining light on the loophole. TPS has been exploited not as a temporary lifeline, but as a permanent shield, allowing migrants to remain indefinitely, while activists lobby for citizenship. As legal challenges intensify, the stakes could not be high. Activists argue that removing TPS holders will tear communities apart, hurting families, friends, and local economies. But critics insist that America's immigration system cannot be governed by emotion. The rule of law must prevail, or else it sets a dangerous precedent where policies are overridden by feelings. If TPS holders are allowed to remain permanently, what does that mean for the millions waiting in line to immigrate legally? Does it reward those who bypass the system while punishing those who respect it? Homeland Security insists conditions have improved in countries like Nepal, Nicaragua, and Honduras, with lawsuits and rallies designed to frame the government's actions as heartless rather than lawful. At its core, this battle is about sovereignty. Who gets to decide America's immigration policies, elected leaders enforcing the law, or activists pressuring the courts with emotional appeals? For now, ICE is clear. TPS was never a pathway to citizenship, and the expiration of protections.
President Trump has promised to expand ICE raids in Democratic-run cities, including right here in Chicago.
Well, Ravi, the Johnson administration says Chicago is one of 5 blue cities targeted by the Trump administration. City officials have been told ICE agents have been given 48 hours to stand by and deploy.
Well, Ravi and Cheryl, Chicago aldermen and activists are still here talking about what happened today.
This president has declared war on poor people. You know, if the president was sincere, he would not be declaring war on poor people and going after homeless people. And he is literally plundering our cities as we speak.
One moment it was a normal afternoon in downtown Chicago. Shoppers browsing. Kids sipping juice boxes. Couples splitting smoothies in the food court. The next, it was chaos. Over 100 armed ICE agents stormed in. Flashbangs detonating. Exits sealed, IDs demanded. Within hours, more than 2,400 undocumented migrants were in custody. Families ripped apart, workers detained, and an entire city left in shock. This wasn't a random sweep. It was the largest immigration raid in modern U.S. history, carried out in broad daylight inside a mall. For a sanctuary city that prided itself on resisting federal crackdowns, the message was loud and clear. Nowhere is off limits. What really happened inside that mall? And what does it mean for the thousands now living in fear across Chicago? The raid, codenamed Operation Trojan Horse, wasn't improvised. A leaked DHS memo revealed agents had been monitoring the mall for 6 months. Facial recognition scans, undercover visits, payroll checks. This was precision surveillance. When the hammer finally dropped, it landed hard. Federal officers poured through service doors and freight corridors, moving with military coordination. Witnesses say flashbang grenades went off as exits were locked down. Shoppers froze mid-bite, stunned as tactical teams swarmed tables. Some tried to run, but most were cornered within seconds. By the time the smoke cleared, thousands were detained. Janitors, cooks, day laborers, stock clerks, even food court vendors who had worked there for years. For ICE, it was a showcase of strength. For families and businesses, it was a nightmare that shattered the illusion of safety in Chicago's so-called sanctuary city. The scale was unprecedented, not a quiet sweep, but a public display of power meant to send shockwaves through immigrant communities everywhere. The fallout hit instantly. Videos spread across social media showing handcuffed workers being marched past stunned shoppers. Protests erupted outside ICE's Chicago field office, where families gathered holding photos and handwritten signs, desperate for answers. Many of those detained were shipped out the same night, some to Indiana, others to undisclosed facilities hours away. No phone calls, no updates, just advocacy groups filed lawsuits within days, accusing ICE of bulldozing due process, detaining people without warrants, denying access to lawyers, and sweeping up individuals without individual review. The ACLU blasted the operation as unconstitutional, while ICE insisted it had acted within the law, focusing on people with deportation orders or criminal charges. But the sheer number of detainees told another story. This wasn't a narrow enforcement action, it was a dragnet. For Chicago's immigrant communities, the sanctuary city promise now felt hollow. If federal raids could rip through a mall in broad daylight, what neighborhood would be safe tomorrow? The controversy deepened as details emerged about who knew what, and multiple former employees claimed mall management had advance knowledge that something big was coming. Yet cleaning crews, kitchen staff, and food court workers, the very people targeted, were left completely in the dark. Federal agents slipped in through back corridors, hitting the staff areas first, before flooding the public space. Critics argue it was deliberate class profiling. The lowest paid, most vulnerable workers dragged away while corporate managers walked free. Outrage grew as videos showed day laborers chased across fields and vendors clinging to trees to avoid arrest. City leaders denounced the tactics as unconscionable, accusing the administration of setting human traps. And yet, the operation ran like clockwork. Fast, focused, unstoppable. For supporters, it was proof the system could finally enforce immigration law on a massive scale. For opponents, it was a chilling reminder of what unchecked federal power looks like when it lands in your own backyard. Beyond the human toll, the economic impact was immediate. Foot traffic at the mall collapsed, plunging by more than 60% within a week. Stores shuttered, employees quit, and the entire shopping district fell into a slump. The ripple spread through nearby immigrant neighborhoods where small businesses saw sales crash almost overnight. Fear itself became an economic weapon, with workers staying home, families avoiding public spaces, and communities paralyzed by uncertainty. And this wasn't just about one raid. ICE confirmed more cities are on the list, with whispers of future operations targeting other Illinois malls, suburban shopping centers, and transit hubs. The strategy was clear. Take the fight to the most visible, everyday spaces. Not factories, not hidden work sites, but the places families felt safe. That visibility is what made this raid so explosive. It wasn't just an enforcement action, it was psychological warfare, designed to shake confidence in sanctuary protections and remind everyone that federal power can strike anywhere, anytime. Lawsuits filed by immigrant rights groups and the ACLU are pushing for injunctions to block future raids, citing violations of due process and constitutional rights. Chicago's mayor blasted the federal government for what he called a reckless display of force, but critics argue city leaders provoked the response by doubling down on sanctuary policies just days before the sweep. On the ground, families remain in limbo, children without parents, breadwinners disappeared overnight, and communities left fractured. ICE officials insist their focus was on criminal aliens, but with over 2,400 detained in one afternoon, many question whether the dragnet blurred far beyond that line. For those who lived it, the memory lingers. A lunch break turned battlefield, a mall transformed into a holding pen, a sanctuary city exposed as vulnerable. And with more raids looming, Chicago may only have witnessed the beginning of a much larger storm. In less than 3 hours, downtown Chicago changed forever. What started as a food court lunch turned into the biggest immigration crackdown in modern U.S. history. The shockwaves are still being felt, in the courts, in the streets, and in families left behind. But the bigger question is this: should public spaces like malls, schools, or transit hubs be fair game for immigration enforcement? Or does this kind of operation cross a line that puts entire communities at risk?